Hi, Mike.
Hey, how's it
Hi.
going?
I'm Olena, Dr. Olena Berezovska, and I have today a special guest, Dr. Mike Rucker, right? And I would like to introduce this wonderful speaker because when I was reading your bio and looking through your web pages, believe me, I was smiling constantly because even how you introduce yourself, it's resonate with my introduction of myself. So you put the first line that you are author, father, and husband, which I do the same. I say I'm a doctor, a mother and wife. So it's very like resonates with me. Then you organizational psychologist and also you behavioral scientist, right?
Yep.
Recovering entrepreneur. The word recovering is very funny. And we're going to talk about this later. Fitness enthusiast with mechanical parts. And I was thinking this, wow, VW bus aficionado. I would like to buy this type of bus. It's like my dream. Now I have a specialist, so
There you go.
I'm going to talk to you when I'll be ready to buy. And then you seeker, a traveler, future astronaut. Not everyone would say like future astronaut, but you just said I'm future astronaut. And then you're the author of books examining the science of fun. And the book name is The Fun Habit. And I tell you honestly, I never met a person, the author of the psychologist that dealing with fun part, fun habits, because usually we're talking about more serious topics, right?
Yeah.
And then we're talking about fun, a huge part of humans' life, right?
Yeah.
Entertainment and fun. And you put it like under microscope, like the science, right? And you start writing, explaining why do we need fun. And I'm going to order this book because I
Oh,
really
thank
would
you.
like to know more. And I'll provide in information about this video, just like scroll down. Yeah, I'll provide more information about you and all links where people can read about you and be part of your program and also purchase this book. You also becoming very known and popular because your activity is just like no, like huge. You given more than 100 interviews per year. You writing articles. You were featured in Wall Street Journal, in Forbes, and you helping even some famous organization to improve the psychological atmosphere in the
Employee
organization.
well-being. Yep.
Yes, and well-being. And I found that you were in a show Baywatch, which is I like this. I like the show. I
That
so,
was a long time ago.
but I know, but still. So welcome to our podcast, and I'm
Thank
very
you so
happy that
much.
you found the time to talk about fun, and from scientific point of view, from psychological point of view. So uh, really, and actually, when I was thinking what kind of question I'm going to ask you, then I said, no, I want to listen. I want to listen more. And I know your story, your life story, how you failed, and then you was completely transforming yourself and doing completely different things and became a very known a speaker, a known person, right? So let's
Well,
start. Mhm.
I think, you do have a similar background. Obviously, actually, I mean, thank you for all the accolades, but quite honestly, your pedigree is, I think, kind of made me feel, like very modest because you certainly, very wise with regards to positive psychology. So I think a place to step in, right, is both being advocates of the space, right? I got very fortunate that when Marty Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi were creating the Congress that I got invited in early on. And I was still fairly young with regards to my academic acumen. So I drank from the fire hose. And I think when you get access to information fairly early, maybe you over prophesize it a bit. I mean, I certainly became a zealot and really, started to value happiness in a way that, that I unpack in the book. We won't wait for the surprise ending, right? That became problematic. And so I think why folks, you know, are interested in having conversations, especially in the positive psychology elk, that you and I find ourselves, is this idea that, this emerging concept that a lot of us did kind of go overboard, right? The professor I really like, and we don't need to get deep in the weeds because certainly her research has been replicated. And I think, you even see the MAP program getting on board. We don't really necessarily look at happiness as an end goal anymore. But before then, especially in the early congresses, because we casted such a wide net outside of academia, a lot of practitioners and things of that nature, we were really almost turning happiness into this hustle proposition, right? And I fell into that. I kind of coupled it with my affinity for, quantified self, for kind of measuring things quantitatively. And we now know that those folks that are overly concerned with their own happiness, paradoxically, are some of the most unhappy people. And so I think that's really, where some of my work resonates, because yes, we should definitely value happiness. Absolutely. Do we want people to flourish globally as a kind of macro concept? Of course we do. But this idea, especially in Western cultures, where we're steering people to, let's look for good vibes only, how problematic that's become. So in essence, when I talk about a fun habit, it's really just about being mindful of the activities that you're doing, realizing that you have some agency and autonomy to potentially, either through reframing or by your own design, bias those actions towards, what I call positive valence, which is just a geeky way of psychologists saying having fun. That we have the ability to do that instead of, this constant exercise of retrospection where we're looking at happiness in the rearview mirror, which is essentially at that point cognitive behavioral therapy in reverse, right?
Yeah. I know that right now the topic of happiness is like completely even like separate science or part, let's say, of psychology, but it's a huge science right now, and everybody looking for meaning of science. And I heard that even people invest a lot of money in the science of happiness, but fun. I don't know even definition of fun, honestly speaking. Maybe you would help me. But fun, it's a part of happiness, of joy, of well-being. And it's important to have some funny moments and feel like joy, love. Love is also an important part, right? Even
Absolutely.
from a scientific point of view, regarding the health of people. If people don't laugh, it means they probably have depression or going through some problems. And then back to the fun. You are pioneer in this field, which is amazes me, right? Because
Thank you.
not too many people dealing with fun and try to look from different angles, from even like the science and emotions and feelings and everything. What do you think fun is? Like, how would you describe it? Like, give your own definition, separating from our definition of happiness. So.
Yeah, for me, it's an action orientation, right? So essentially it's a verb, and it suggests that we're engaging in an activity, again, that's on that positive side of valence, right? And so generally there's only two academic terms, that I tend to unpack just because they are meaningful with regards to the science behind it. So for anyone that's not familiar with valence, it's essentially just, are we experiencing pleasure in what we're doing, or are we not, right? So when we say we're on the positive side of valence, it essentially means the things we're doing are enjoyable, are fun, and we're drawn to them. And if they're on the negative side of valence, we tend to be repelled by them. And those are things we call not fun, right? So my simple definition for fun is essentially, are we enjoying ourselves? And then sometimes in the literature, you'll hear hedonic tone, right? Are we, and which are essentially the same thing. So for me, the reason as a construct it's important is, when we're talking about, are we enjoying our activities, we're essentially just saying, are we having fun in what we're doing? And especially here in the West right now, right? What I found, and I think there was a degree of serendipity to this, that we've been so overprescribed to the Protestant work ethic, where so many of us kind of mortgage happiness or this sense of fulfillment for the future, because we are deriving self-worth through productivity, but not necessarily enjoying ourselves. That type of maladaptive hygiene having some clear consequences, right? So
Yeah.
the way that we understood sleep deprivation in the 90s with regards to, folks essentially squeezing out productivity in the late hours, and how quickly that was empirically validated to be such a asinine assertion, right? Because what happens is your productivity quickly falls off a cliff after being sleep deprived for several weeks. I think the same, we're making a fairly strong argument now that the same is true for being fun starved. So the research in this area is called the hedonic flexibility principle. But what we know is the folks that aren't finding joy in the things that they're doing, and that's not necessarily hard workers, because in my research, found plenty of people that are super productive but also enjoying themselves. But the folks that aren't enjoying what they're doing, slowly but surely, a little bit more insidious than sleep deprivation, but slowly but surely become less productive. But then what's even more fascinating is they're also the same people that aren't able to be innovative and don't seek out harder challenges. Because we know that, right? When we're burnt out, and I know you've done a lot of work in this area, we have to rely more on our wisdom, right? Life becomes algorithmic because we're just trying to survive. We're trying to get from point A to point B. And if we put in the work, we generally do have the recipes and the roadmaps, but essentially we're not invigorated at all, right? And so we start to lose that vitality and vigor because we're not enjoying it. And sometimes it's as simple as just, hey, let me approach it in a different way. Or to your point, let me engage in pro-social behavior, like, especially coming out of the pandemic. I thought I wanted to work from home, but in reality, I'm super lonely, going back to Robert's work with The Good Life, and I've really fallen in love with Paul Zach's work here too, an ode to what you suggested at the beginning of our episode. We're kind of rich with activities that will engage our dopamine receptors, right? But we've sort of forsaken oxytocin, which is perhaps maybe an even more component of us feeling generally well than dopamine, because dopamine is meant to motivate us, but it can eventually deplete us. We need each other, right, for those releases of oxytocin, which we know needs to be balanced for us to feel like we're connected to something. I really like thinking about it as a we proposition, right? We've been so stuck in this meritocracy and this, what can I do, this me proposition, that we've forgotten that it's less about where we fit, it's less about where we rank and more about where we fit. And so when we can make that paradigm shift, right? Like, wait, am I number one? Am I number two? And instead of, how can I contribute to the folks that I care about? That subtle shift generally means you're also enjoying the things you're doing more, because you like the people that you're with. You're not just constantly, right, perseverating on, is this gonna, get me higher up the ladder, or am I finally going to cross the finish line where that reward is?
Yes, and when you mention oxytocin, because I work in obstetric gynecological field, and we usually use it like only practically to contract uterus, but a lot of change when we start talking about motherhood feelings, like maternal feelings to be a mother. And we found a set of genes that activated after delivery when the woman started having even more feelings for the baby. But also oxytocin, usually they call them the hormone of love when we're talking about women,
right.
Mother's love. And the scientists start looking more in this field to understand the reaction of woman, how she become a mother, even not just mentally, but through some mechanism in our genetic code. But only a few women don't have this activated genes, and that's why they don't love children. They don't want to be mothers, even if they have children. So it's interesting that we start turning to the science and hormones in the brain work. So now we looking even deeper, even in traditional science like obstetrics gynecology. We start talking about stress, we start talking about depression, we start talking about many other psychological topics. And I think it's wonderful.
That's where the balance is, right? Obviously, some of this comes from reductionist science. And so to completely dig in your heels and say, well, this is in isolation, true, but we're trying to paint a story, right? It's really a mosaic. And so I think you're exactly right. I'm fascinated that we're finally transcending even just motherhood, because I think that's fairly well studied. We get it that, you know, essentially those bonds are created and that it's an important molecule in that regard. But it's clear that those, they're not the same by any stretch, but similar genetic pathways, similar in the sense that they're mechanisms that create bonds happen in grandparents, right? So that those same mechanisms create that. And we now see gene expression once, you know, parents find out that they're grandparents. And then the same with fathers, although this happens with rough and tumble play. I talk about it in the book. Like, and so oxytocin is still released between the relationship between father and child, but it's expressed through things that, you know, again, potentially have a gender bias, but it's still neat. It's again, this thing that suggests that it connects each other. But the insight that I got from Dr. Zach that I think was the most sort of like, whoa, is that it generally requires us to get it from others. So, you know, you hear like, you know, all of these biohackers, and they're fairly interesting on their podcast about how we can, you know, optimize our hormones and, you know, again, potentially regulate dopamine. And probably why we don't talk about oxytocin enough is because we're really reliant on others to get it, right? I mean, you give someone oxytocin when you give them a smile and greet them warmly, or, you know, you embrace each other or whatever it is. And so in that regard, I think it's fascinating, you know, in the sense that it does really require empathy and to a degree caring about other people, which might be a subtle way to help us reframe from, you know, again, these fallbacks of meritocracy and things of those nature, you know.
Yeah. When I was working on a book about hormones, I was surprised by a discovery that our brain depends on so many substances and many even hormones we never even saw, like progesterone, for example. It's important for brain work. And then many other substances. So I think we just at the beginning coming to the discovering even more data about this important substances. We are talking about these programs of survival, not just like programs of survival of the body, but I mean how we perceive people, how we perceive nature, surrounding, and it's important that we start looking more deeply in this like functions of brain, cognition, behavior, emotions. Before it was rejected, but by medicine. It's not related to medicine, but now we combine actually.
Yeah.
Science.
And I think the challenge, right, is that with regards to hard science or basic science, you know, I think as a practitioner, you want to embrace a concept, but hold it gently. And so often in science, you know, I grew up, my dad's a biologist. You really do need to make an assertion, you know, especially in the previous area of publish or perish, right? And so, but what we, you know, as we're learning more and more about epigenetics, and I'm sorry, I'm not
epigenetics. I know what epigenetics is. Yeah. So there are a couple models created by psychologists, by psychiatrists, how internal and external factors affect our life, and it's all can be related to our health, mental and physical health. And
yeah, I think like with statins and beta blockers, that kind of blew that wide open, right? Here's some drugs that are extremely effective if you have the right genes and could be, you know, potentially extremely harmful if you don't. I'll give a personal example, I guess, to be a little bit vulnerable. You know, I have an autoimmune issue, and when I take prednisone, you know, essentially spike my cortisol, I have a flurry of different interesting things that happen. And so I think, you know, you look at these broad-based interventions, whether they be physiological or psychological, and yes, we need to understand, you know, maybe at the sigma of 3, what's going to happen, and then at the same time be empathetic that some folks are going to have a very individual experience to, you know, this cascade of biochemical things that happen in their brain. And, you know, to kind of get us back to thinking about enjoying ourselves, I think, you know, another thing is that you know, when we're talking about our behavior, it really is about equity, because a lot of these things, you know, if we're using a blunt instrument like pharmaceuticals, of course, you're going to see this quite quickly, right? But if we're talking about changing our neurochemistry because we changed our behavior, which we now firmly believe is true because CBT, you know, tends to outperform SSRIs, right? So if that's true, then engaging in interventions that allow people to live more joyfully, I think that's why this argument is getting stronger, because we absolutely know it has more of an impact than just mindset, right? It really does change biology over time. The problem is we don't exactly know how, and for each person, it's potentially different. If you have treatment-resistant depression, and I talk about this in the book, I'm not going to tell you to go fun your way out of it. That's a horrible suggestion, right? But there are certainly people that are at the cusp of burnout that if they do things radically different could potentially change the trajectory of where they're going.
Well, we cannot deny now that we have respond by our in our brain, in our function, body's function, when we feel good or when we feel bad, because thanks to neuroscience, we know what part of brain reacts for the stimulant, right? And that's important that finally we start accepting the thought that it's not enough to give a pill and say, oh, like, I mean, any medications that this will treat you. That's it. Just go home and start taking these pills. And unfortunately, in traditional medicine, official medicine, we train people to accept that this is pill. It's enough to be healthy, enough to be happy, enough to solve the problem with your pain, like mental problems you're suffering, which is not right. And I'm really happy that the positive psychology and psychology itself is growing and expanding and finally start being accepted by even like traditional doctors, traditional scientists. Yep. And we have even more information now and understanding better why we react in some specific under specific circumstances, and how can we help these people without any medication. It's not necessary to be on medication all the time, and when it's necessary, then it's okay.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I've been thinking about this idea as doctoral student. I made a compelling argument as part of some research that, because this was pre really identifying the opioid crisis, and you could tell, and I don't know if it's the same in Canada, because I know that's where you practice, but in the States, we have something called Press Ganey that essentially is a way for patients to identify the efficacy of their physicians. And you could tell that folks that had more of their incentivization, the way that they would get salary increases and that nature tied to Press Ganey survey results, would overprescribe opiates because they know patients would be happy, right? And and so that's been kind of unearthed and I think well documented. But to your point, things like Cymbalta that are essentially similar sledgehammers that kind of make people feel better, but are essentially just a fire hose and don't address root conditions, or root causes rather. I mean, why do they keep increasing? Is that because they do less damage than opiates, but they're still tied to for future cognitive decline? So I think there are some strong arguments for more low-level interventions if they have a similar impact. And again, I think that really got unveiled, in the last half decade with regards to CBT, through double-blind studies showing that they are more, have a higher efficacy. So you're right, we're on to something and it's exciting, but we need to keep having conversations like this, right?
Yeah, true. And going back to fun, quite often in our society, no, we have fun. I know. I enjoy it. I enjoy our conversation. Going to fun, when we go back to the past of humanity, of civilizations, what I see quite often, and even now, people think that fun and entertainment are the same, but actually it's not. But if you look in ancient Greece or ancient Rome, so to have fun, people were going to this sport games, sometimes very cruel. So they had a lot of entertainment, and also they have this dances and music and plays, right? So they had fun. But at the same time, as the perception of fun changed, we don't see any cruelty like we had before.
Right.
But still, when I hear from old generation, when teenagers say we're gonna have fun, they think it's about drug abuse, it's about some kind of like, not healthy um, activity and not healthy
Yeah.
behavior. You wrote straight. We need to have a habit to have fun, right? And it's not necessary using drugs. It's not necessary to do something illegal or wrong and feel,
Yeah, essentially that becomes escapism, right? And it's not restorative. So I think that's, the warning label that I put on that is that if it doesn't lead to betterment, and that ultimately, when you look at it retrospectively, you couldn't savor that, then it wasn't really fun, right? And so, there are certain things like social media use, like binge watching television, that
yeah.
essentially just displace negative valence. So we trick ourselves into thinking it's fun because it's taken us out of pain, boredom, or discomfort, right? And so we're like, oh, I've essentially created a positive outcome because now I'm out of pain. But is that truly fun? Because again, the definition for us is that it's truly positively valent, which means you are enjoying yourself. You're not relieving pain per se. It's something that you actually enjoy doing. Again, is invigorating, and you're drawn to it.
And also, if we look through age, like different periods of life, like children are born to have fun. They like fun, right?
Yeah. And we know that that type of pro-social behavior leads to growth, right? I mean, it leads to growth for adults too, but it's how you understand the social norms that you were born into. It's how you, bounce off the boundaries set by your parental figures. And it also figures out what you enjoy doing. One of the components that makes fun unique for everyone is your preference for arousal, right? So are you introverted and do you like to read books, or do you want to go play football and smash heads, with your best friends? And so that's how we figure all that out as children. But as you know, as adults, especially in the modern world where we have so much incoming information, we have to develop heuristics, right? We have to figure out, ways of filtering that out. And unfortunately, the consequence of that is we become less innovative and less interested in things that are novel, which is really, one of the best playgrounds for finding enjoyment.
When we growing up and becoming like older, I found that as adults, we quite often starting to suppress children and put our meaning of fun or interpret fun in a wrong way. And then some adults, they become very unhappy in a way that they cannot express themselves and have fun, feeling like funny, because first of all, they're afraid of some kind of accusation that they have some mental problem and you old person, you cannot be funny. At the same time, look at Instagram or in Facebook, but how many people have the accounts when they act funny, like comedians, and they're not professional comedians, but we have a lot of subscribers. We love fun. We like, even I subscribe to the people just to laugh, because they say something in the morning, then I have a good feelings. I was laughing, good. My day started from, and what it says that naturally inside of us, every person, it means we open to the fun, but we suppress ourselves to make this habit to have fun. And if you say in the title of your book, a habit, it means we can create this habit, even if we suppress it before, or even think, no, it's for children and teenagers. So I would like to tell you more about this fun habit, like in the projection, what adults have to learn how to create this habit to be to feel funny, to have fun.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really an ode to the fact that adults do habituate their behavior, right? And so for us, if we feel like we're living a life where that's not abundant, then creating a habit becomes helpful, right? And so certainly we're not trying to advocate for a life of whimsy, But if you feel like it's not integrated into your, daily activities, how can you habituate it? Because the good news is once we do habituate our behavior, it tends to stick as adults. So there's a set of tools in the book. I bring up one acronym called SAVER, and just unpack that really quick. Story editing is simply reframing. So if you're stuck in that sort of sense of guilt, or there's some other sort of headwind that's really just a mindset issue, to unpack that. If it's because you live a busy life and you can't figure out where you can integrate more of those in, then there's some behavioral science you can use. I call this activity bundling. Concepts like pre-commitment and premeditation really can help move the needle, because oftentimes it's just that we didn't think about what we wanted to do when we do have those opportunities. And then along the lines of premeditation, just figuring out what your options are, because sometimes it's that we're, again, in that state of overwhelm that we don't have the capacity to kind of think about what fun things are. And so giving yourself that space on your calendar to be able to say, you know what, these are some things I want to do, then you start to prioritize it, right? And so that could be as simple as having a coffee date with a friend you haven't seen. We're talking about trying to reintegrate 2 to 3 hours of something enjoyable a week. And so oftentimes when someone comes to me and says, well, I'm just too busy. Okay, there's 168 hours in the week. Even if you're sleeping 56 of those, which is fairly healthy, 8 hours of sleep a day, and working 65, like think about how much time you still have left over. And so if you're not finding, again, less than 5% of the time that you have in these 168 hours of doing something enjoyable, then that you're generally on a downward trajectory, right? And so there's a whole host of useful tools. We could go on and on. One of my favorites comes from Dr. Cassie Holmes out of UCLA, simply just entering the weekend with the mindset that it's meant to be your vacation, because so many of us kind of let it be an extension of work. So that you have a true transition ritual, right? From a really tough 5 days into 2 days that really should be your time. And so these are all simple when you hear them out loud, but so many of us are not putting them into practice. So, the good news is it's just subtle adjustments that really, enables you to right the ship. And then you get in this perpetual upward spiral rather than a downward spiral. And so that's what a fun habit's all about.
Our time is coming to the end. I mean, the time of podcasts, and I'm sure we will talk like probably about this even for hours, because we have a lot of common, as I see, and very common perception of fun. What would be the shortest message for our viewers and listeners from you?
Yeah, I think, well, I'm gonna make it a little bit longer. So there's two that I think are really important right now, right? One is, again, for the folks that like more of a quantitative approach, again, remember there's 168 hours in your week. So going back and identifying things that you potentially aren't spending your time in a way that's filling you up, because we don't want to make fun just another bullet item on your busy to-do list. First figure out what are some things where you can kind of clean the garage, as it were, and then, invite back fun in. So that's one. The second, for the folks that like more of the psychology behind it, I recommend Googling the hedonic flexibility principle. It is clear now that there's a rich body of science to suggest that being fun starved is as unhealthy as being sleep deprived. And so this isn't just something that's like, oh, this guy's telling me to have more fun, right? This is something that really will improve yourself, make you more productive. And then, quite frankly, because of social contagion, have a ripple effect, with everyone that you care about. And so, again, this isn't like, just kind of a whimsical prescription. It's something that I think is really going to have a significant impact in improving the well-being of others.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I wish you all the best. And
Thank you,
I think
Olena.
we'll
This
have
is a pleasure.
I will have some other podcasts with you. And thank you for joining me.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye. Take care. I think for me, it's more about leaning into that discomfort of when, so because I've kind of optimize for fun. For me, my like kind of next endeavor is really, leaning into opportunities to spin down, because oftentimes I think we all write these books because we need to hear them. And
Yeah.
so I do derive quite a bit of my self-worth from productivity. And, I think just being there for your loved ones is so important. And so unpacking, that residual, like, it's okay, you don't have to, especially because my kids are high energy too. So like, if they get distracted, then I'll use that as an excuse, to kind of, okay, fine, I'll go check email or whatever. And being like, no, you're the leader here, you're to some degree the patriarch and, clearly the expert because you decided to write a book on it, like bring them back, and so that's what I've been trying to do.
No, you're great. You're very great. My crazy idea, to
Okay.
have fun. Whenever I go to my hairdresser, and for a couple of years, I always like shock her because, oh, let's change the color. I want like pink and purple and mess. And she always like, are you serious? You're gonna destroy your media image. Like you're a doctor, you cannot be, you're right, you're like, you're a media personality. So just like, and I'm, are you serious? I want to have fun. So one day I'll do it, but I understand her feeling. She says, you have to look professional. I said, okay, but what's wrong with different colors of hair? I mean, I can be professional with this type of hair.
Yeah, and I think it's getting more accepted now. I would start with a streak, right? I was just seen at the Mayo Clinic, and my physician had, a purple streak. So I think,
this is what I want.
Yeah.
Actually, next time I'm gonna ask my hairdresser, just follow my dreams. I want to have fun. Okay,
All right.
bye.
Till next time.
Bye. Yeah,
Bye.
have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Take care.